Important national event which will remain etched in our memory. May I, however, request that you all remain in your respective positions until the cottage and all the dignitaries left
these people are coming
the stadium. Thank you.
And so that's how we start to come to the end of the program here. In fact, it's officially finished. The dignitaries are starting to leave now. And the last item on was the release of 95 doves of peace to represent every year of his life. President Robert Mugabe has been remembered by many dignitaries throughout the course of today. We heard from speeches from former heads of state, current heads of state, and representatives from across the continent and other parts of the world. As far as China, Russia, Cuba were all represented. I believe Nicaragua was here as well. Such was the stature of the man that was celebrated today, and helping to cover that story, which has been difficult at times, is Griselda Lewis. You've been here a few days, and we were talking just before the 21-gun salute about how challenging the storytelling this time was for you.
Well, that's right, Peter. Obviously, we flew into Zimbabwe and we did not know what to expect, of course, due to the attacks on foreign nationals in South Africa. And certainly we got a sense from the point that we arrived in the country that all was not good. You know, there was a great sense of disappointment in speaking to some of the Zimbabweans here. But we managed to get a great deal of work done. But you could sense the underlying. I've been to this country several times for the inauguration of President Emerson Mnangagwa, covered 3 elections in this country. So I've never experienced the kind of relationship that we had this time with the people of Zimbabwe. So it came as no surprise to me that that was the response that President Cyril Ramaphosa got when he took to the podium to pay tribute to the former president. And fortunately, straight after that, I decided to go onto the stands just to speak to some of the people who were in attendance here, and they were quite categoric. They appreciate the apology from the South African president, but you can see there's a great sense of them not fully understanding exactly what is going on, and they want an end to it, basically, and they feel quite aggrieved by what is taking place in South Africa. So currently, with the words from them, they're like, we're here to bury someone who really championed the ideals of Pan-Africanism, yet you have an African leader who takes to the podium and has to explain himself about a conduct that certainly is not, that they've described as un-African.
And it was quite interesting to see the different reactions, Griselda. Right at the beginning, there were those boos, but as he apologized, the crowd immediately, as you said, appreciated the apology and started to cheer him as he carried on speaking, almost as if he managed to win over the crowd that was here.
Well, that's right. So I think an apology does go a long way. And you would recall, I mean, a lot of things have been circulating on social media. And in particular, a video where it purports that the South African president himself had somewhat been encouraging, attacks, not attacks rather, but, the sentiment. One gentleman that I spoke to on the stairs had said to me he'd seen that video and he appreciates that the South African president has apologized. However, he needs to come up much stronger about, the attacks on foreign nationals in South Africa. It goes against Ubuntu. That is what they're saying. So I think, ironically, as we hear today, Peter, and it's the end of an era of many who were here have described as a champion of Pan-Africanism and Ubuntu, then I guess, the reception that the president of South Africa received is quite unfortunate, and I think a conversation needs to be held.
What we're seeing now is President President Robert Mugabe leaving the National Sports Stadium for the very last time. A stadium that he addressed his faithful, his citizens for many, many years over the years. But as he starts his long journey, which may take as long as 30 days, this is his last time at one of the country's monumental stadiums.
Well, that's right, Peter. This, of course, being the final public send-off for the later President of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe. And you can see here as the coffin leaves the National Sports Stadium, accompanied by generals, and just right behind there, of course, Grace Mugabe, the former First Lady, Bona Mugabe right next to her, and the two sons just behind, and other members of the Mugabe family and Kushungo clan.
Yes, indeed. His entire family, his son, the tallest one there, of course, named after him, Robert Jr., and his daughter standing next to him, and the youngest, Bellarmine. And we see the other heads of state that are starting to walk through. Sophie?
Yes, currently we see the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Emmerson Mnangagwa, leaving, and behind him the military personnel. I think these are the generals. You know that former President Robert Mugabe was a commander-in-chief. And Griselda, yes, it's getting there. It's an end.
Certainly is the end of an era. The public, of course, send off for the former president of Zimbabwe. In 30 days' time, Peter and Sophie, that's when the burial will take place at the Heroes Acre monument here in Harare, and that, of course, being a private affair for the family, and set aside for, I guess, distinguished guests who will be invited by the family.
And I can speak as someone who was here in 1980. I was just 15 years old at the time. And there was a great expectation about the country that had just been liberated. Robert Mugabe at the time wearing a socialist suit, and he was seen as this hero that had saved the country and brought in a new era. And there was so much excitement about a country that was unfolding, one that we had no idea what the history was going to be when it was finally written, but many, many things played out. We enjoyed highest levels of educations that any citizens could. He expanded healthcare as well in the rural areas in particular, where there had been no hospitals and clinics. He brought them there. So the early days were certainly very exciting and full of hope. And in fact, on Independence Day, the Zimbabwe dollar was stronger than the American dollar. So it was a great time. Over the years, the journey has been long, and for some has been difficult as the changes took place over time. And so today, as people bid farewell to President Robert Mugabe, a man that they perhaps only have ever known as their president, President Mnangagwa only been in power the last year and a bit. Many of the young people that we see only knew him as their president. And so no matter what they're feeling, there's no doubt that he had an influence, and they'll be feeling something, whatever that thing is, as this man has departed, age 95.
Yes, Peter, his resting place will be the Heroes Acre. You told me that you are familiar with the history of the Heroes Acre and how it was built.
Yes, indeed. I've got to say that my father was working for the government for a long time at that stage. And so one of the projects that he helped oversee was the building of the Heroes Acre. And we're very proud that one of my uncles modeled for one of the three people that you see in front of the statues there. So we have a family member at Heroes Acre that we're proud to see. So it is a powerful history to see. A lot of the things that were built and the monuments that were built spoke about a time of change and a time of hope. And we can only hope that the speeches that we heard today resonate, so that a lot of the things that perhaps didn't go according to plan can be corrected, that can be reversed, and that the dreams of 1980 can be fulfilled once and for all.
Certainly, Peter, and with what you've alluded to with the many young people and others as well indicating when there was those hopes back in 1980 from the people that we spoke to here today, hopes of great education, and certainly, the late former president of Zimbabwe is credited with, the level of education that is enjoyed by Zimbabweans. And you hear that a lot from the people that we speak to and that we have been speaking to over the past few days. On issues that South Africa is debating at this stage pertaining to land, the Zimbabweans that we have spoken to have often said he was the one who understood that without the land, Zimbabwean people were not going to enjoy the fruits of their so-called freedom.
The story of Robert Mugabe is a difficult one to tell, and it really depends on who you're speaking to and where in the country. If we were in Matabele land, for example, they probably might be looking at these images and looking at this story in a completely different way, given what played out in 1983. So if we have to be fair and to be honest, we have to say that this is definitely a mixed legacy, and that over time, different stories will play out. But I have only fond memories. We'll see, you've been and spent a lot of time in this country. I have lots of great memories, particularly in the early years. It was an exciting time to be young, an exciting time to be experiencing a new country, much in the same way as South Africans did in 1994. What are your memories of Zimbabwe?
Yes, I think I'm pretty much like you, Peter. I was part of those golden years, born in the kind of the early 70s, not to give too much away. But, we had the privilege of the education system, the free universities, and, all the facilities that basically after a while were no longer available, were no longer working. So we were still there at the point at which things were working. But unfortunately, after 2000, as we all know, it all kind of took a downward spiral. And by that time, unfortunately, I had gone back to South Africa. Yeah, but I do have very fond memories of Zimbabwe. And every time I come back here, I think my spiritual home is actually Zimbabwe.
Yes, yesterday, Peter, myself and Busi, we visited Highfields, and I could see, the excitement that this is home, and we had to go around and pass through the house where she used to live. I think as Africans, we are one family, and we must just learn to live side by side.
Yeah. Highfields is one of the iconic townships of Zimbabwe, and Harare in particular. And when he came back from exile in 1980, one of the first rallies he did was attended by, I think it was almost 1 million people. It was almost the coming of, I can only compare it to when people like the Pope arrive in a place. So again, lots of hope. Highfields, he spent a lot of time there as well. And a lot of the liberation leaders actually would call places like Highfield home. I even spent a bit of time in Highfield. But as we start to wrap things up here, it's been an interesting week in terms of trying to figure out what's going to happen in terms of the actual burial, the actual ceremonies over today. The actual ceremonies today and the coming weeks and the coming month. However, we are seeing the crowds here starting to leave, that they came out in their numbers. It wasn't a full stadium, but I think that those that came fully appreciated what they saw and the messages that they heard, Griselda.
Absolutely. From the speeches that we also got to hear on the podium, Peter, certainly someone being sent off, who championed, the progress of Africans. What went wrong? Perhaps we could debate that on another day, Peter. But currently, I think there was a oneness that I really picked up as I crisscrossed these stands. A oneness about, we're not going to talk about what went wrong. What we're going to talk about is the contribution that the former president of Zimbabwe has made towards the liberation of his people. Not just the liberation of his people, but also the liberation and the support that this country had also given to countries such as South Africa when they faced a very tough time times during apartheid. So rich history that hopefully will not be buried come the next 30 days. But certainly those who do write, the textbooks a bit later on would have a legacy to tell about, a checkered, a different, legacy that this man leaves behind. So whoever gets to tell that, good luck to them. But certainly we heard from the people of Zimbabwe who'd sent off a man who they'd, for most of their lives, known as their president.
Yeah, and people would have said the things that they wanted to say, particularly on social media and here at home and in the diaspora, because there are millions of people outside the country. We can't forget that. And part of the reason that they are in the diaspora is that things were difficult back home, and a lot still needs to happen. A lot of issues that the current president's going to have to deal with. And not just the unity of the country, but just keeping the lights on. We're seeing here in this country sometimes load shedding lasting 18 hours, unemployment of huge proportions. But perhaps where we started today, when I was speaking to the family spokesman, Leo Mugabe, he said that if his uncle was here, what he would have said is that please come together, unify, and perhaps that's one thing that we can leave the people of Zimbabwe, the continent and the world as we say goodbye from here.
And in fact, Peter, indeed, that was some of the sentiment that was shared while we were also on the stands, is that many of the people that we spoke to, we would not be doing justice to this if without speaking to the people of Zimbabwe themselves, and them indicating that it's an end of an era, yes, but now across party political lines, there needs to be a oneness, a unity in this country to ensure that it moves forward. Because after all is said and done, and while this may be an end of an era, the people of Zimbabwe continue to face daily challenges, and that's going to need a unity of all its people, whether you're in the opposition, whether you are the governing party. So that's where we're going to have to leave it. Thank you very much for joining us here from live from the National Sports Stadium in Harare, Zimbabwe. Goodbye.
Okay. Well done.
Thank you very much. Thank you.